Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in TradFi, digital assets, technology, and financial planning. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, joined by Jeff Schwartz, Vice President of North America Engineering at Checkpoint Software, as well as Rhon Daguro, CEO of authID, both Nasdaq-listed companies. They're here to discuss the most significant developments in 2023 for cybersecurity, the impact of AI, and of course, outlook for 2024. Gentlemen, it's great to have you both with us. Welcome to Trade Talks. I'm going to kick it off with you, Jeff, and talk about some of the most significant developments that you've seen in 2023 for cyber. In fact, we were talking off air before. I would even venture, let's call it the past 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, thanks, Jill, for having me. So artificial intelligence continues to be a very, very big development in this cybersecurity industry. Specifically, its usage among malicious threat actors and the advance of generative AI as reducing the overall cost of attack within the threat landscape. That's the first development. The second is recent developments associated with regulations and President Biden's recent executive order around management and monitoring of the risk associated with artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and we're going to dive into that more deeply, but Rhon, speaking of AI, it could do so much for the industry, but of course it also adds more leverage for the threat actors as well. Why is that one of the reasons why we're seeing the surge in cyber attacks? Are there other reasons why?
Well, absolutely. You have the people that were dabbling in fraud or thinking about fraud. Now AI has provided a tremendous amount of tools that's going to give these people more capability and more threat to the landscape. And also to add on top of 2023, one of the things that's even more visible now is ransomware attacks. So we've had ransomware attacks against schools, hospitals, but now they hit major casinos. One paid, one didn't pay. We all know what happened to the one that didn't pay.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and I feel like schools, hospitals, they're going for the most vulnerable parts of the population. I mean, that's where your most prized data is, if you will. It's not even like they're asking for money anymore. They're compromising your data, which is, there's an intangible worth to that.
Absolutely. So like with today's security systems, really when they need to know who you are, they go and look for all that information about you. And so that information is 10 times worth more in the marketplace because they can use that to repeatedly create fraud over and over again across all the enterprises, across all the markets.
Yeah, well, I mean, can AI be used in such a way that it can help the cyber industry?
Yeah, so the value of artificial intelligence, obviously it adds value to both the attacking side as well as the defending side. And on the attacking side, while it's reduced costs and put very sophisticated capabilities in the hands of people that would otherwise not have access to them, on the defending side, it allows us to accelerate and make better security decisions in an optimized fashion. So what that means is that we can make higher quality decisions to prevent malicious activity at greater scale. So when we look at the rollout of additional technologies and the extent to which organizations are leveraging more modern infrastructure, cloud computing, automation, that these things require a better qualitative advantage as it relates to preventative controls. And that's an area that, as an industry, we need to continue to push forward to leverage artificial intelligence as a tool set to be able to provide better security outcomes.
Yeah, and we were also talking about this off camera, but we have this migration to cloud, and of course we got hit with the double whammy with the pandemic 3-4 years ago, and that's kind of when I feel like the migration to cloud was really taking place. And I've recently learned this, and it's not just a cloud, but multiple clouds that enterprises are working on. I mean, and there's different vendors, I would imagine, for each cloud that you're leveraging. Isn't that the case?
Absolutely, absolutely. And when you move everybody to the cloud, now the attack vector is the cloud. And that the attack vector is very simply, that's the honeypot, that's where all the information is, that's where all the vendors are, and that's where everybody's trying to focus their security, as well as the fraudsters are then focusing all their fraud attacks against that cloud. And so that's why it's really important for like companies like Jeff's company, where they're actually looking at these devices and making sure that the behavior of these devices on the network are not misbehaving. And then where we focus on is we want to extend it beyond the device. Is it really Jill behind the device? Is it physically Jill breathing alive behind the device, and it's really you, as opposed to just somebody has your device. And so I think that layer of security on the device and the network, plus making sure the human being is alive, almost like proof of life behind the device, is really who you say you are. I think that's how we're going to be able to reduce a lot of these fraud attacks.
And this is what's known as zero trust?
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. So just a really simple term is just don't trust anybody. and don't trust anybody all the time. So meaning just because you let them through the front door, make sure that they're as they travel through the house, always checking who they are at every single point. We call that continuous authentication, and just validating that, again, it's still Jill behind the device and it's not Jeff pretending to be Jill.
And just to add to your remarks, Ron, we've evolved from this place where there used to be trusted and untrusted networks, and then there's trusted and untrusted users. We're at this stage now where you really need to validate and verify trust, not just against users and devices and networks, but the context of how these users are accessing, the context of now we have automation where there's machine-to-machine communication. What is the context of one process or one application element talking to another? And really interrogate and have a preventative capacity to limit communication where there's something potentially malicious ongoing between two elements that they may be semi-trusted users or devices or networks, but being able to provide a security envelope around what we would characterize as the smallest atomic element of security and be able to provide enforceable controls against that boundary layer. So what this means is as organizations roll out more endpoint devices, more mobile devices, more cloud infrastructure, and they have these very, very heterogeneous environments, being able to have a comprehensive security model that supports enforcement across all of these different asset classes within a consolidated management architecture that allows for high degrees of collaboration with existing security tools and operational assets. That's how organizations that are successful implementing Zero Trust have done so.
Yeah, and you're saying consolidated infrastructure. It feels like the tech stack is just so big right now, and there's so many layers and so many vendors and so many, and of course within the organization itself, you have competing priorities in terms of what each organization within the enterprise needs to fulfill. And that's that's another thing too. I think everyone just assumes that cybersecurity falls underneath the tech part of the organization, when in actuality, when I think of cyber, and with what I've learned through reporting, it really is a risk function at this point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And when you introduce the human component to be part of that risk function, you have a lot of errors. People who have to put in passwords don't like to do it, so they try to memorize simple passwords. And again, that whole password strategy has been flawed and proven. But really, extending what I call contextual security that Jeff was describing around the behavior, and then going one step further, making sure that we throw up the camera and prove that it is Jill actually holding the device or Jeff holding the device.
Yeah, and when we talk about risk as a business process, or managing risk as a business process, some things that are really important to understand is that a lot of organizations have started with an observability or a visibility first approach, that let's see what's happening within given environments. The challenge with that approach is that when something bad happens, there's really no capacity to actually prevent it from scaling across the rest of the organization, if you are even able to find it after the fact. And so there needs to be an increased focus on the preventative controls to be able to keep bad things from entering the environment, and then once they're in the environment, moving laterally. And that's where we've seen organizations find the most success with their risk management programs, as opposed to assigning risk via cyber insurance or managing risk by accepting the potential security outcomes.
And that's a perfect segue for us to talk about regulation and some of the SEC proposals that have been introduced. At the end of the day, you're both publicly traded companies listed on Nasdaq. It can't, if you have a cyber breach, you can't just shut off all the systems, because you have sales and revenue areas of the company, and that does impact what happens to their share price, how your investors perceive you, brand reputation, all the things that you would imagine. How do you think the reporting and new regulations that are coming out are going to impact your respective companies, the industry itself?
Yeah, so many years ago, there used to be a big red button that when your infrastructure was contained within a data center or a fixed environment, you could hit a big red button to make sure that nothing goes in and out, and you can find the problems. We've evolved very far beyond that, where now organizations are leveraging much more modern infrastructure in multi-cloud environments. So there is no big red button in this case, and now managing risk becomes part of a regulatory requirement that there needs to be as there needs to be very transparent disclosure of cyber events. But this creates a very high degree of accountability for organizations, that they can no longer pass the buck on the potential negative consequences of poor cyber programs. So increasing that accountability and visibility of the potential impact that these incidents have will increase the overall quality that organizations have to invest into their cyber programs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately or fortunately, it is absolutely shining the light that the fraud isn't going away. It's actually growing faster and faster, so regulation has to try to catch up and try to get a hold of it. Again, building off of the topic here of accountability, some of these things are just really showing how serious this has to be. Organizations, again, are trying to put security programs in place, but it's not working. We're seeing breaches all the time, and so the seriousness of it is really what it's highlighting, and then obviously the consequences are very dear to these organizations. So.
Yeah, I would say that regulation is necessary, but it's not sufficient, right? It's a starting point. It's not an end point of where organizations need to evolve to. But again, it creates some guardrails that organizations can look to improve their overall programs. But AI obviously accelerates the potential risk of misuse within many organizations as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I've learned that you're starting to see more cyber professionals on boards as well,
yes.
Especially with these regulations rolling out, because the board is obviously going to be responsible to the regulators, to the investors. I mean, you're even seeing the CISOs; they're beelining right into the the CFO function. So it's not like it's just reporting to the CTO and that's the end of it, but it's the overarching management of the risk. And I just thought it was really interesting to see that they, you think about board diversity, but diversity of experience and bringing cyber professionals on seems to be a key trend right now.
Yeah, and it's clear that boards are beginning in an increasing fashion recognizing that cyber is a material and tangible risk to almost every organization. And you mentioned hospitals, schools, the casinos, critical infrastructure. There's many industries that are fairly regulated that they can't move very quickly to adapt and evolve to the changes in the threat landscape. They can't adopt new technologies as quickly as they would like. And I think it's those industries in particular that need to understand what their risk profile consists of and be able to have the right security program to reduce that risk in an accelerated fashion.
Yeah. And as you described, these CISOs reporting directly to the CEO, these CISOs profiles are changing. They have to have AI backgrounds. They have to have deep math skills in addition on top of security, kind of like attributes in their role. So it's a really challenging thing out there for CISOs to even evolve to what the market is looking in terms of fraud happening in the landscape.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying before in terms of, you have all the different business units competing for resources, but survey after survey suggests that cyber spend is increasing. They're not dialing back on that, and I would imagine too, across the organization being able to monitor risk in real time and have access to not just your division, but to see like where the holes are, if you will. I think that could potentially be a trend too, is just how risk software evolves and how that is managed. In my mind, it's no longer the CFO function.
Yeah, it's there needs to be again, the reason that this is a board level concern now is there needs to be organization-wide acceptance of the potential risk, and this includes the CFO/COO of, in terms of governance and legal and risk assessment and management, but also the technology organization, the CIO, to be able to operationalize some of the changes that need to be implemented to improve the security programs.
All right, in the last few minutes here, let's talk about your 2024 cyber outlook. We're only, 6-7 weeks away from 2024?
Yes. Well, I think the most important thing is that the world and the industry has been moving to security to protect the device. And so everybody's been really focused on the device, and really what's highlighting in 2024 is we got to look beyond the device as well to make sure that the human being behind the device is really who they say they are, and the introduction of biometrics into the space is going to be a big question because there's privacy concerns about biometrics. When can you use my face, when you can use my fingerprint, and really the education for using live biometrics, physical breathing biometrics to help identify who you are, it's now going to be part of the mix now because obviously the breaches have been proven that we can get past the devices.
All right, and Jeff?
Yeah, organizations are being pushed to adopt more diverse technologies and with more diverse user populations and more diverse use case scenarios. And they're doing so, that's increasing the surface area of risk within almost every organization. And if they don't, organizations need to, and what we anticipate happening as part of Zero Trust adoption is supporting programs that have a comprehensive security strategy that provides consolidated infrastructure and management visibility, as well as collaboration with the existing tool sets and operational capabilities of the team. But we see that the problems are very, in great likelihood going to get worse. But there's never been a greater need for qualitative advantage around the capabilities that the leaders in the industry provide.
All right, gentlemen, appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks, and thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.